Hey everybody, Ryan Voigt. I wanted to make a quick video talking about remembering to hook in. I'm going to try to focus on the positive. We're not going to call it failing to hook in. We're going to call it remembering to hook in. And people are probably going to recognize that this topic is coming up now because there was a recent video that went around, another tragic failure to hook in. This happened to be a tandem. It's not the first time that a tandem flight has forgotten to hook in either the pilot or the passenger, but it's definitely not the first time somebody's forgot to hook in. So let's talk about it a little bit. Whenever this comes up, inevitably somebody brings up what has become known as the Aussie Method. If you look at this glider here, my friend Ricky's glider, he's got the harness connected to the glider, still on the ground. And whenever somebody seems to forget to hook in or somehow launch unhooked, this always comes up. He should have hooked the harness up to the glider before he flew. And I am not going to come here to argue whether that is a good practice or a bad practice. But I would like to point out that that does not actually solve the problem. And I think talking about that and kind of unpacking that idea a little bit could improve people's safety, whether they want to use that technique or that practice or they want to do it a different way. But let's talk about it for a minute. The problem is obviously forgetting to hook in. The problem is not when you hook in or if you put your harness on first or you put your harness on after it's already hooked in. This does somewhat solve that problem, because if you hook the harness in, it does make it easier to check that all your lines are straight. It's worth noting that this technique has become very popular for harnesses that have a front zip, like a pod harness where you can put it on and zip it up. It also does not help you remember your leg loops. And it seems a little bit like, because it's so easy to pick the harness up and put it on like a jacket, put your arms through the armholes and zip it up, that it maybe even leads to more forgetting the leg loops, but I don't know. I don't have any data to back that up. What I will say is I'm here in upstate New York. We have a really nice grassy launch. Letting your harness sit on the ground like this is not such a bad thing, right? There are a lot of flying sites where this technique is not going to work. You might have a $2,000 harness and you're not going to leave it laying in the dust and the rocks, getting dragged around. Maybe if it's windy and the glider is moving a little bit, maybe not the best idea. There's also, maybe it's uncommon, but even here we have ants, little red ants. I know people that have had red ants in their harness after they took off. Harness is sitting on the ground, picks up some ants, you don't really know, you put it on, you go to fly, you feel like a little thing, you feel another thing, you have ants in your harness. That's a bit of a distraction. Maybe it's unlikely. Maybe that's better than launching without hooking in. It probably is better than launching without hooking in. But again, you're trading one problem for another problem. And the biggest thing that I want to talk about with this is the idea that it solves a problem. Because there are things that we should be afraid of, because being afraid of them makes us make sure that it doesn't happen. You know, I have two little kids and I always ask them, how do you make sure that you don't have an accident, you don't fall over or something? Glider just went, Dust Devil! Hang on a second.
Yeah.
Okay, that was exciting. That brings up an interesting point that wasn't even what I was about to say. But if you hook into your glider, you put your harness here and you hook into your glider here, you are hooked in to your glider for a longer period of time as you walk to launch. And this launch is pretty short walk and easy, but there are plenty of sites where you don't want to be hooked into your glider for longer than you have to be. And you might want to position the glider on launch. You might have wire people holding the glider and then you hook in. So the practice of always hooking your harness to the glider may not fit for that situation. And one of the biggest things that advocates of this technique will say is that if you always do it the same way, you can't launch unhooked because there's no way you could put your harness on, because you always hook your harness to the glider first, except for these rare situations where maybe there's a really good, really safe reason that you're not hooking the harness to the glider first. And there's always that chance that you forgot something, your helmet's out of reach, and you go to get your helmet and you unhook. Like, it would be good to always be disciplined, but what we just had here was a dust devil that just flipped a glider over, and if that pilot was getting ready to fly, he might have been putting his harness on here instead of hooking in on launch. So that's something to at least think about. It's a risk, and the whole game of flying is risk management. So we have to think about these risks and then make decisions on how we manage them, and it might be different for different places. What I was going to say before the dust devil came through was that the idea that this technique somehow alleviates the problem of launching unhooked, that is the problem in itself, because we need to be afraid of launching unhooked. Not unsafely so, not so much that it messes with your psyche and you're like phobic about it, but you need to be worried about it to make sure that you're hooked in. And what I was starting to say is, I have 2 kids, and I always say to them, how do you make sure that you're not going to have an accident? How do you make sure you're not going to fall off the bike? Or, you're doing something and if you drop that, it's going to break. It's made out of glass. How do you make sure that you don't have an accident? By making sure that you don't have an accident. Kind of like being very conscious and paying attention. So what this can alleviate for people is that fear of launching unhooked, because harness is connected, solved that problem. I'll never launch without hooking in. And I think it's actually, in this case, because the consequences of launching unhooked can be so severe, and because it keeps happening, and because humans are fallible and we can forget things, that you should be afraid of launching unhooked and not thinking that this technique solves that, because this technique just trades a system for the fear of being hooked in. And you become reliant on a system, and then that system can fail you, because if you somehow end up wearing your harness but not hooked in, you might not check that you're hooked in, because you go, oh, if I'm wearing my harness, I must be hooked in, because I only hook the harness to the glider first and then I put my harness on. So if I'm wearing my harness, I must be hooked in. So a system that is designed to make it safer could actually make it more dangerous. I think what we really need to focus on is not some magic technique that will make sure that we never do this, but we just need to make sure that we are actually hooked in. So whichever way you want to do it, whatever kind of harness you have, whatever kind of sight you have, whatever your situation is, I don't care. Nobody cares which way you do it, but make sure that you're hooked in. Put your harness on, make sure your lines are straight. If there are people around, get a hang check. Before you launch, you can lift the glider up and feel the harness go tight. That's a good way to also check your leg loops, because you feel that tug on your leg loops. It's called a hook in check. But check twice, check 3 times, and then check a 4th time. The only way to kind of make sure that you don't launch unhooked is by being afraid of launching unhooked. And if you're comfortable that it'll never happen to you, you're probably at greater risk of launching unhooked than somebody that is afraid of it. So being more comfortable and less afraid of it is not making you any safer. So some things to think about. Clearly, I haven't solved the problem. Unfortunately, people are going to keep forgetting to unhook to hook in, because we're human, but hopefully you can forget to hook in and your friend catches it, or you do a hang check and you lay on the ground and then you go, oh shit, I forgot to hook in. But yeah, just some stuff to think about on the topic, and be safe, everybody. Cheers. Bye.